He thought he had committed the perfect crime. Trenton Graves didn't just divorce his wife, he destroyed her. He hid the assets, bought the judges, and left the woman who supported him with nothing but a rusted sedan and a broken heart. He spent the evening bragging to his mistress about how he had outsmarted the mechanic's daughter. But Trenton forgot one crucial rule of business: never underestimate the quiet ones. He didn't know that the man he mocked for having grease under his fingernails, his wife's father, held a secret so powerful it could turn Trenton's empire into dust in a single phone call. Tonight the celebration ends, and the real trial begins. The crystal flute shattered against the marble fireplace, but nobody at the table stopped laughing. In the private VIP room of Le Sommet, the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, Trenton Graves was holding court. He was a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin, tailored just as sharply as his $3,000 suit. "To freedom," Trenton bellowed, raising a fresh glass. "And to the finest legal team money can buy." Around the circular mahogany table, a group of sycophants raised their glasses. There was Preston, his shark of a lawyer who had buried 3 subpoenas in paperwork just last week. Chloe, the woman who had transitioned from his executive assistant to his mistress the moment the separation papers were filed. And a handful of junior partners from the firm, eager to be near the smell of success. "You really left her with nothing?" Chloe asked, her voice a purr as she traced the rim of her glass. She leaned into Trenton, her eyes gleaming with the reflection of the city lights below. "Not even the house in the Hamptons," Trenton scoffed, shaking his head as he popped an olive into his mouth. "The Hamptons, Chloe, babe. She didn't even get the condo in the city. Preston here found a loophole in the prenup regarding infidelity clauses. We argued that her emotional distance constituted a breach of contract." Preston chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. "It was a work of art, if I do say so myself. We painted Sophie as a negligent spouse. By the time the judge banged the gavel, she was lucky we let her keep her maiden name." The table erupted in laughter again. It was a cruel, jagged sound. "But seriously," one of the junior partners asked, leaning forward, "she was with you for 10 years. Didn't she know about the offshore accounts, the shell companies?" Trenton leaned back, spreading his arms wide. "Sophie, please. The woman thought a hedge fund was something you used to trim the garden. She's simple. She came from nothing, and today I sent her back to nothing." He took a long sip of the vintage Dom Perignon. The taste was sweet, but the victory was sweeter. For the last year, Trenton had meticulously moved assets. He had funneled millions into a labyrinth of accounts in the Cayman Islands listed under names that didn't exist. He had devalued his primary company, Graves, heavily on paper, making it look like he was on the verge of bankruptcy, only to plan a massive rebound the moment the divorce was finalized. And today it was finalized. Sophie had signed the papers with a trembling hand 3 hours ago. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't fought. She had just looked at him with those big, sad brown eyes and whispered, "You'll regret this, Trenton." "Regret?" Trenton mocked, mimicking her soft voice. "Can you believe that she thinks I'm going to regret shedding 130 pounds of dead weight?" "What is she doing now?" Chloe asked, checking her reflection in a silver spoon. "Moving back in with her daddy," Trenton sneered. "Old Arthur. The man spends his life smelling like motor oil and cheap tobacco. Lives in that rundown garage district on the south side. I told her, 'Sophie, you belong there, among the spare parts and the junk.' It's poetry, really. Dust to dust, trash to trash." The waiter entered the room, a somber-looking man with a stiff upper lip. "Mr. Graves, there are 2 guests requesting entry to your party." Trenton frowned. "I didn't invite anyone else. Tell them to get lost. We're celebrating a liberation, not hosting a charity event." "They insisted, sir," the waiter said, looking uncomfortable. "They said they are here to return something you forgot." Trenton looked at Preston, then at Chloe. "Did I leave my wallet at the courthouse?" "Maybe it's the process server for your next lawsuit," Preston joked darkly. "Send them in." Trenton waved his hand dismissively. Let's see who has the audacity to crash my night. He expected a courier, perhaps a disgruntled former employee. He did not expect the heavy oak doors to swing open and reveal Sophie. But it wasn't the Sophie he had seen in court that morning. The woman in court had worn a gray, shapeless cardigan and had her hair pulled back in a messy bun, looking every bit the defeated housewife. The woman standing in the doorway now was wearing a midnight blue dress that hugged her silhouette with terrifying precision. Her hair fell in cascading waves around her shoulders, and her face was painted not with sadness, but with a cold, impenetrable resolve. And beside her stood Arthur. Trenton almost laughed out loud. The old man looked exactly as Trenton remembered him, wearing a faded flannel shirt under a canvas jacket that had seen better decades, with work boots that left faint, dusty prints on the plush carpet of the restaurant. He looked like he had just walked out of a pit stop. Well, well, Trenton stood up, clapping his hands slowly. The returning hero. And she brought the help. The room went silent, but it was an awkward silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a thunderstorm. Chloe looked Sophie up and down, a flicker of insecurity crossing her face before she masked it with a sneer. Sophie, Chloe said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Did you get lost on the way to the soup kitchen? This is a private dining room. Sophie didn't look at Chloe. She didn't look at the lawyers or the sycophants. Her eyes were locked on Trenton. We aren't staying for dinner, Trenton, Sophie said. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremble that had defined her for the last year of their marriage. We came to give you a chance. Trenton blinked, then threw his head back and laughed. A chance. You came to give me a chance. Sophie, the ink is dry. The judge has gone home to his wife. It's over. You got the Honda, I got the life. What exactly are you offering me? Arthur stepped forward. He walked with a slight limp, a souvenir from years of working under lifted trucks, but his gaze was sharp as a razor. He pulled out a chair, not to sit but to lean on it, his knuckles white and scarred. We're offering you a chance to walk away with your dignity, Arthur said. His voice was gravelly, deep and rough. Before things get complicated. Dignity. Trenton walked around the table, approaching the old man. He towered over Arthur, using his height to intimidate. Old man, do you know how much this suit costs? It costs more than your entire garage. Do you know where you are? You're in Le Sommet. People like you usually only come in here to fix the dishwasher. Trenton, stop, Sophie said quietly. No, I won't stop. Trenton shouted, the alcohol fueling his rage. I carried you for 10 years, Sophie. I pulled you out of the gutter that this man raised you in. I gave you class. I gave you purpose. And you bored me. You were a decoration that stopped shining. And now you bring your father here to threaten me. Trenton turned to the room, gesturing at Arthur. Look at him. This is my father-in-law, Arthur Miller. Miller's Auto Repair. A genius with a wrench maybe, but he can't read a financial statement to save his life. Arthur didn't flinch. He reached into the inside pocket of his dirty canvas jacket. Preston, the lawyer, jumped up. He's got a weapon. Arthur slowly pulled out a folded, crinkled envelope. It wasn't a weapon. It was a single sheet of paper, thick and cream-colored, with a wax seal that had been broken. I can read fine, Trenton, Arthur said softly. I can read the numbers you hid in the Cayman Islands. I can read the shell company registration for Blue Horizon Ventures. I can read the transfer logs for the $2 million you moved last Thursday at 11:42 p.m. The room went deathly still. The junior partners stopped drinking. Preston froze halfway out of his chair. Trenton's face drained of color, but he quickly forced a smile. Bluffing. You're bluffing. Sophie told you some fairy tales to make herself feel better. Sophie didn't tell me anything, Arthur said, tossing the envelope onto the table. It landed right next to the champagne bucket. You did. I never spoke to you, Trenton spat. Not to me. To the bank, Arthur said. What bank? Trenton demanded. I bank with Sovereign Global. They are the most secure private institution in the world. They don't talk to mechanics. Arthur smiled. It was a terrifying expression on the old man's weathered face. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator watching a rabbit run into a snare. Sovereign Global, Arthur repeated, tasting the words. Fancy name, prestigious, exclusive. They handle the wealth of kings and oil tycoons. Exactly, Trenton sneered. People way above your pay grade. Trenton, Sophie spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. Who do you think owns Sovereign Global? Trenton looked at her confused. What? It's a conglomerate. It's owned by a board of directors, shareholders. And who holds the controlling interest? Sophie asked. Who owns 51% of the voting shares? Trenton laughed nervously. Nobody knows that. The majority shareholder is a private entity called AM Holdings. It's anonymous. That's why we use the bank. For the privacy. Arthur reached out and tapped the table with a grease-stained finger. AM, Arthur said. Arthur, Miller. Trenton stared at him. He looked at the dirty fingernails, the flannel shirt, the worn-out boots. Then he looked at the expensive envelope on the table. You're lying, Trenton whispered. You fix cars. I've seen your shop. It's a dump. I fix cars because I like cars, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. I fix cars because it keeps me grounded. It reminds me of where I started 40 years ago. But my shop isn't a dump, Trenton. It's my meditation room. My office is on the 40th floor of the building across the street, the building you're looking at right now. Arthur pointed out the panoramic window to the steel and glass skyscraper dominating the skyline. The lights of the Sovereign Tower shone brightly in the night. No. Trenton backed away, bumping into the waiter. That's impossible. You're a nobody. I'm the man who approved your business loan 5 years ago, Arthur said. I'm the man who allowed your firm to restructure its debt last year. I didn't intervene because I wanted to see if my daughter could make it work with you. I wanted to see if you were a good man. Arthur took a step forward, and for the first time Trenton noticed the change in the old man's posture. The frailty was gone. He stood with the bearing of a general. I stayed silent when you missed family dinners, Arthur continued. I stayed silent when you insulted Sophie's cooking. I stayed silent when you started working late with Chloe. Chloe squeaked and tried to hide behind her wine glass. But then, Arthur said, his eyes narrowing, you tried to steal from her. You tried to leave my little girl with nothing. You thought you were playing chess, son. But you were playing with my money. And nobody plays with my money. Trenton looked at Preston. Do something, sue him for defamation. He's lying. Preston picked up the envelope Arthur had thrown on the table. He pulled out the document. His hand started to shake. Trenton, Preston whispered, his voice trembling. This is a foreclosure notice. Foreclosure on what? Trenton screamed. I own my penthouse. I own the office building. Not anymore, Arthur said calmly. You see the loans you took out to leverage your hidden assets, the ones you thought were so clever, they were secured against your primary holdings, and the terms of those loans. Preston read paragraph 4. Preston squinted at the paper, sweat beading on his forehead. Paragraph 4. In the event of any fraudulent financial disclosure during a legal proceeding, the lender reserves the right to call the full value of the loan immediately due. You committed fraud in court today, Trenton, Sophie said, her voice ice cold. You lied about your assets, which triggered the clause. Which means, Arthur finished, you owe AM Holdings, you owe me $85 million, payable immediately. Trenton felt the room spin. I don't have $85 million in liquid cash. It's tied up in... Then I'll take the collateral, Arthur said. Your penthouse, your car, your boat, and your partnership at the firm. You can't do that, Trenton shrieked. I already did, Arthur said. The locks on your penthouse were changed 10 minutes ago. My security team is there now packing your personal effects into cardboard boxes. I believe they left them on the curb. The restaurant was dead silent. The other diners had stopped eating to watch the spectacle. Trenton looked at Sophie. Sophie, honey, please, tell him to stop. We can work this out. I still love you. Sophie looked at the man she had wasted a decade on. She looked at the panic in his eyes, the sweat dripping down his face, the pathetic desperation. You don't love me, Trenton, Sophie said. You love winning, and for the first time in your life you just lost. She turned to her father. I'm hungry, Dad, but the food here is terrible. Agreed, Arthur said, patting his stomach. Let's go get a burger, my treat. They turned to leave. But the story wasn't over yet. Because men like Trenton Graves don't go down without a dirty fight. The heavy wooden doors of the private dining room swung shut behind Arthur and Sophie, leaving a vacuum of silence in their wake. For 10 seconds, no one moved. The air in the room was thick, suffocating, smelling of expensive cologne and sudden acrid fear. Trenton Graves stood frozen. His hand still half raised as if to call them back. His face a mask of pale disbelief. He turned slowly to look at the people he called his inner circle, his friends, his colleagues, his lover. He expected outrage. He expected them to rally around him to laugh off the old man's threats to call the police. Instead, he saw the one thing he had never seen in their eyes before: distance. Preston, the shark lawyer who had just moments ago been bragging about destroying Sophie, was frantically stuffing papers into his briefcase. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't close the clasp. Preston, Trenton said, his voice cracking. Get on the phone, call the partners. We need to file an injunction to stop the seizure of the penthouse. We need to sue that old lunatic for harassment. Preston didn't look up. He snapped his briefcase shut and stood up. I can't do that, Trenton. What do you mean you can't? Trenton barked, his old arrogance flickering back to life like a dying ember. I pay you a retainer of $20,000 a month. You do what I say. My firm. Preston said, finally meeting Trenton's eyes with a look of cold calculation. Has a line of credit with Sovereign Global. If Arthur Miller really is the majority shareholder of AM Holdings. If I go after him, he could dissolve my partnership with a single phone call. I have a mortgage, Trenton. I have kids in private school. You coward, Trenton screamed. He's a mechanic. It's a trick. Mechanics don't have foreclosure papers stamped with federal seals, Preston said, adjusting his tie. I'm sorry, Trenton. Conflict of interest. You're on your own. Preston walked out without looking back. One by one, the junior partners stood up. They muttered vague excuses. Early meeting. Dog is sick. Left the oven on. They scurried out of the room like rats fleeing a sinking ship, avoiding Trenton's gaze. Finally, it was just Trenton and Chloe. Chloe was sitting very still, her beautiful face unreadable. She looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, a gift Trenton had bought her last week on credit. Chloe, Trenton exhaled, slumping into a chair. He ran a hand through his hair. Can you believe this? The audacity. Don't worry, babe. It's a clerical error. I'll sort it out in the morning. Let's order dessert. Let's salvage the night. Chloe slowly stood up. She smoothed down her red silk dress. She picked up her clutch purse. I don't think so, Trenton, she said coolly. What? Trenton looked up, hurt flashing in his eyes. Babe, don't be like them. It's just a bump in the road. Trenton, Chloe said, her voice devoid of the warmth she used to fake so well. I didn't sign up for bumps. I signed up for the Hamptons. I signed up for the penthouse. If you don't have those. What exactly do you have? I have me, Trenton shouted, standing up. I'm still the same man. No, Chloe sneered. You are the money. Without the money, you're just a 40-year-old man with a bad temper and a drinking problem. And frankly, you were always boring. The money just made you tolerable. She turned on her heel and walked out. Trenton stood alone in the center of the VIP room. The remnants of the party, the half-eaten appetizers, the empty chairs, mocked him. The door opened again. It wasn't a friend. It was the restaurant manager accompanied by 2 large security guards. The manager held a small leather folder. The bill. "Mr. Graves," the manager said, his tone icy. "We require settlement of the bill immediately. The total is $15,400. Trenton sneered. He reached for his wallet. "Fine. Put it on the black card." He tossed the heavy metal credit card onto the tray. The manager swiped it on a handheld machine. Beep. Declined. The manager looked at him. "Declined, sir." "Try it again," Trenton snapped. "It's a limitless card. The chip is probably dirty." The manager swiped it again. Declined. "Try the platinum." Trenton threw another card. Declined. "The gold." Declined. Trenton felt a cold sweat breaking out on his back. "This is ridiculous. Their systems must be down. Look, I'll write you a check." "We do not accept personal checks from customers with flagged credit ratings," the manager said. "And I have just received a notification from our central billing office. Your account has been frozen due to suspicion of insolvency." "Insolvency," Trenton whispered. "Sir." The manager signaled the security guards who stepped closer. "Unless you have $15,000 in cash, we will have to call the police for theft of services." Trenton checked his wallet. He had $200. He had to call his mother, his 70-year-old mother who lived in Florida on a pension. It took 45 minutes of humiliating explanation lying that he had been mugged to get her to wire the money to the restaurant's account. When Trenton finally stumbled out of Le Sommet, it was raining. Not a soft drizzle, but a torrential downpour that soaked through his custom Italian suit in seconds. The valet stand was empty. His Porsche wasn't there. "Where is my car?" he screamed at the valet. "Repossessed, sir," the valet said, not making eye contact. "Tow truck came 20 minutes ago. Said something about a lien holder executing a seizure order." Trenton stood in the rainwater dripping off his nose. He had to walk. He walked 12 blocks to his building, the prestigious Skyline Heights. He marched into the marble lobby, ready to scream at the concierge, ready to demand entry to his home. But as he approached the elevators, 2 uniformed police officers stepped in his path. "Trenton Graves?" one officer asked. "Yes. Finally, officer, arrest this man." Trenton pointed at the concierge. "He won't give me my key." "Mr. Graves, we have a restraining order here," the officer said, handing him a wet piece of paper. "And an eviction notice. You are barred from entering the premises of Skyline Heights pending the investigation into your financial fraud." "My stuff," Trenton stammered. "My clothes, my watch collection." The movers packed everything designated as personal non-assets, the concierge said, pointing through the glass doors to the side alley. "It's on the curb, sir. We covered it with a tarp, mostly." Trenton ran outside. In the dark, wet alley, he found 6 cardboard boxes. He ripped one open. It was full of his old college sweatshirts and some books. He ripped open another. His toiletries. Where were the Rolexes? "The Patek Philippe's assets seized against the debt," a voice said from the shadows. Trenton spun around. A man in a dark suit was standing there holding an umbrella. He looked like a statue. "Who are you?" Trenton hissed. "I work for Mr. Miller," the man said. "He wanted me to give you this." The man handed Trenton a small plastic card. It was a motel key card, the Bayside Motel, room 104. "Mr. Miller said he didn't want you sleeping on the street tonight," the man said. "He said he has a heart. The motel is paid for until Tuesday. After that, you're on your own." "I don't need his charity." Trenton threw the key card on the ground. The man shrugged. "Suit yourself. It's a long night, Mr. Graves." The man walked away, getting into a black SUV that glided silently into the night. Trenton stood in the rain looking at the soggy boxes of his life. He looked at the warm golden light of the penthouse, his penthouse 50 stories up. He saw a silhouette in the window. It looked like Arthur. shivering, defeated, and broken. Trenton knelt down in the mud and picked up the plastic key card. The Bayside Motel was the kind of place Trenton used to joke about. It was near the docks, smelling of salt water and diesel fumes. The carpet in room 104 was sticky. The wallpaper was peeling and the neon sign outside buzzed with a maddening zzz sound every 3 seconds. Trenton didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress staring at the wall. The alcohol had worn off, replaced by a pounding headache and a cold, sharp clarity. He had been played. He replayed the last 10 years in his mind. Sophie, quiet, supportive Sophie. He had always assumed she was simple because she was kind. He assumed she was weak because she was gentle. He had mistaken her silence for ignorance. And her father, Arthur. Trenton had met the man maybe 5 times. He remembered laughing at the old man's dirty hands at the wedding rehearsal. He remembered buying Arthur a cheap tie for Christmas and thinking he was being generous. He played the long game, Trenton muttered to the empty room. He watched me. He waited. Anger began to boil in his gut, displacing the fear. This wasn't justice. This was a setup. Arthur Miller had entrapment written all over him. No mechanic becomes a billionaire banking tycoon without burying some bodies. Trenton stood up. He wasn't done. He was Trenton Graves. He was the top closer at Graves and Partners. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. He could talk his way out of anything. He needed a shower. The water was lukewarm and the pressure was pathetic, but he scrubbed himself clean. He put on the least wrinkled shirt from his cardboard box, a blue Oxford that smelled slightly of mildew, and tied his tie. I will not yield, he told himself in the cracked mirror. He grabbed his phone. He had 12% battery left and no charger. He needed to make these calls count. He walked out of the motel and hailed a cab. He had found a crumpled $20 bill in his jacket pocket. It was enough to get him to the business district. He arrived at his office building at 8:30 a.m. Graves and Partners occupied the 20th floor. He strode through the lobby, flashing his smile at the security guard Ralph. "Morning, Ralph," Trenton said, breezing toward the turnstiles. "Mr. Graves, stop," Ralph said, stepping out from behind the desk. Ralph looked pained. He liked Trenton. Trenton gave good Christmas tips. "What is it, Ralph?" "I have a 900 a.m. meeting." "Your pass has been deactivated, sir," Ralph said. "I have orders. You aren't allowed up." "Orders from whom?" Trenton demanded. "I'm a senior partner. I own equity in this firm." "The managing partner. Mr. Henderson came in at 600 a.m., Ralph said. He said you were terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and reputational damage." "Reputational damage?" Trenton laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "I am the reputation of this firm." "Please, sir, don't make me call the cops," Ralph pleaded. Trenton backed away. Fine, I don't need the office. I can work from anywhere." He walked out to the sidewalk. People were rushing to work, coffee in hand, heads down. Trenton felt like a ghost. He was invisible to them. He needed an ally. Someone who hated Arthur Miller. Someone who wasn't afraid of the banking cartel. He scrolled through his contacts. He stopped at a name, Donovan Stark. Donovan was a private investigator Trenton had used years ago to dig up dirt on a rival CEO during a merger. Donovan was expensive, unethical, and effective. He didn't care about banks. He cared about cash. Trenton used the last of his battery to call him. "Stark," a gruff voice answered. "Donovan, it's Trenton Graves." "Graves, I heard you had a rough night." Donovan chuckled. "News travels fast in this town." "I need to see you," Trenton said. "I have a job, a big one." "I don't work for Credit, Graves, and I hear your credit is frozen hotter than a popsicle." "I have something better than cash," Trenton lied. "I have insider information on AM Holdings. I know where the bodies are buried. If we take down Arthur Miller, the settlement alone will be worth millions. I'll give you 20%. There was a pause on the line. Donovan was greedy. Trenton banked on that greed. "Meet me at the diner on 4th and Main. 20 minutes. If you're late, I'm gone." Trenton practically ran to the diner. He sat in the back booth, his heart hammering. Donovan slid in opposite him 5 minutes later. He was a wiry man with a scar running through his eyebrow and eyes that darted around the room. "Talk," Donovan said. "Arthur Miller." Trenton leaned in. "He claims to be the majority shareholder of Sovereign Global. A mechanic. It's impossible, Donovan. The money has to be dirty. Money laundering cartel ties something. A guy like that doesn't just invest wisely and buy a global bank." "So?" Donovan asked, flagging down a waitress for coffee. "So we prove it," Trenton said. "We find the dirt. We expose him. If he's committed fraud to buy that bank, the feds will seize his assets. The foreclosure on me becomes void. I get my life back and I sue him for billions." Donovan stirred his coffee slowly. "You want me to dig into the most powerful man in the city, a man who just erased you from existence in 12 hours? He's not invincible," Trenton hissed. "He's an old man who plays with cars. He's arrogant. He showed his hand too early just to humiliate me. That's his weakness. He got emotional." Donovan looked at Trenton. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the logic. If he really is a mechanic, there might be a paper trail he messed up. Old guys make mistakes. "Exactly," Trenton said. "Find the mistake. Find the one transaction that doesn't make sense." "It'll cost you," Donovan said. "Not now, but later. If we win, I want 50%, and I want the Porsche." "Done," Trenton said without hesitation. "Just destroy him." Donovan pulled out a tablet. "I'll start with the public records on his garage. Miller's Auto Repair. If he's funneling billions, he's got to be moving it through there somehow." He tapped away for a few minutes while Trenton drank water, his stomach growling. He couldn't afford breakfast. "Here," Donovan muttered. "This is interesting." "What?" Trenton asked eagerly. "Arthur Miller hasn't filed a personal tax return in the U.S. for 20 years, Donovan said. "But his shop pays taxes." "Tax evasion." Trenton's eyes lit up. "Is that it? Is that how we nail him?" "No, wait," Donovan frowned. "It says here his tax status is Diplomatic Exemption Class A." Trenton blinked. "Diplomatic? He's a mechanic from the South Side. How does he have diplomatic status?" Donovan looked up, his face pale. "Graves. Look at this. The land the garage sits on. It's not zoned commercial. It's designated as sovereign soil." "What does that mean?" "It means," Donovan whispered, "Arthur Miller isn't just a rich guy. This document suggests he's the honorary consul for the Kingdom of Alaria, a micronation known for banking secrecy and intelligence services." Trenton sat back. "A spy? My father-in-law is a spy. Or he's the guy who hides the spy's money," Donovan said. "Either way, this is dangerous Graves. This isn't just financial court. This is federal. International. Even better." Trenton smiled a manic, dangerous smile. "If he's a foreign agent operating on U.S. soil without declaring his assets to the IRS properly, that's treason. That's prison." Trenton slammed his hand on the table. "We don't need to sue him, Donovan. We need to call the FBI." "You sure about this?" Donovan asked, looking nervous. "If you call the feds on a guy with diplomatic ties and you're wrong, you disappear." "I've already disappeared," Trenton shouted, drawing stares from the other patrons. "I have nothing left to lose. He took my wife, my house, my money. I'm going to burn his world down." Trenton grabbed Donovan's phone. "Dial the number. I want to report a massive international money laundering scheme." As Trenton held the phone to his ear, waiting for the operator, he looked out the window. Across the street, a black sedan was parked. The window rolled down just an inch. Trenton didn't care. Let them watch. He was about to drop a nuclear bomb on Arthur Miller. "FBI field office," a voice said on the line. "My name is Trenton Graves." Trenton said, his voice steady. I have evidence of a multi-billion-dollar fraud ring operating out of Miller's Auto Repair. I'm ready to talk." He hung up, feeling a surge of power. He wasn't the victim anymore. He was the whistleblower. But Trenton had forgotten the second rule of war: know your enemy. He thought he had found Arthur's weakness. In reality, he had just walked into the second phase of the trap. The morning sun hit the pavement of the Southside Industrial District hard, baking the grease and grime into the air. It was 9:00 a.m. and the heat was already rising. Trenton Graves sat in the passenger seat of Donovan Stark's sedan, parked 2 blocks away from Miller's Auto Repair. His knee was bouncing nervously. He checked his watch for the 10th time in 2 minutes. "They're late," Trenton hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The FBI. They should be here." "Relax," Donovan said, chewing on a toothpick. "Feds operate on their own time. They have to brief Gear Up Coordinate. If you really gave them what you said you gave them, proof of international money laundering on U.S. soil, they aren't going to just knock on the door. They're going to kick it down." Trenton smiled tightly. He replayed the phone call in his head. He had given Agent Reynolds everything he knew or thought he knew. He described the offshore accounts, the mysterious AM holdings, the diplomatic immunity claim that Donovan had unearthed. He had painted Arthur Miller not as a father-in-law, but as a mastermind criminal hiding behind a blue-collar facade. "There," Donovan pointed. 2 black SUVs turned the corner silently, then 2 more, then a heavy armored truck. They didn't use sirens. They moved with the terrifying precision of a predator stalking prey. "Here we go," Trenton whispered, a surge of adrenaline masking his exhaustion. "Watch this, Donovan. Watch the king of the South Side get dragged out in cuffs." The convoy screeched to a halt in front of the garage. Heavily armed agents poured out, wearing vests emblazoned with FBI. They surrounded the perimeter. Trenton held his breath. He waited for the shouting. He waited for the battering ram. But the battering ram never came. Instead, the lead agent, a tall, stern man with graying hair, walked up to the open bay door of the garage. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply knocked on the metal frame. Arthur Miller walked out from under a lifted Ford pickup. He was wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look scared. He looked like he was expecting a delivery. Arthur said something to the lead agent. The agent nodded. Then, to Trenton's horror, the agent smiled. He extended a hand and Arthur shook it. "What is happening?" Trenton screamed, grabbing the dashboard. "Why aren't they arresting him? He's a criminal." "Something's wrong," Donovan muttered, starting the car engine. "Graves, we need to leave." "No." Trenton unlocked the door and scrambled out. "I'm not leaving. They're botching it." Trenton ran down the street waving his arms. "Officer Agent, that's him. That's the guy." The FBI agents turned to look at the disheveled man in the wrinkled suit running toward them. The lead agent, Agent Reynolds, adjusted his sunglasses and watched Trenton approach. "Mr. Graves?" Reynolds asked calmly. "Yes, I called you." Trenton pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. "Why are you shaking his hand? He's laundering billions. He's hiding behind a fake diplomatic status. Arrest him." Arthur stood quietly next to the agent. He looked at Trenton with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Mr. Graves," Agent Reynolds said, his voice flat, "Mr. Miller's diplomatic status as the honorary consul to Olaria is fully verified and registered with the State Department. His financial institution, Sovereign Global, operates under strict international compliance treaties. We are well aware of his assets." "Then you know he stole my money," Trenton shouted. "He foreclosed on me illegally." "Actually," Reynolds continued, pulling a file from under his arm, "that brings us to the reason we are here. When you called in the tip, you mentioned specific transaction codes related to the Blue Horizon Shell Company to prove the laundering." "Yes, that's his shell company." "No, Mr. Graves," Reynolds said. "We just ran the codes. Blue Horizon Ventures isn't registered to Arthur Miller. It's registered to you." The world stopped spinning. Trenton blinked. "What?" "The IP addresses used to set up the accounts match your office computer," Reynolds recited. The beneficiary is your personal account in the Caymans. And the funds were siphoned from the escrow accounts of your clients at Graves and Partners. Trenton's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Arthur stepped forward, his voice low and gravelly. You were sloppy, Trenton. For 3 years you've been skimming from your clients to pay for your lifestyle. The cars, the dinners, the jewelry for your mistress. You were robbing Peter to pay Paul. I, Trenton stammered. I knew about it, Arthur said softly. I own the bank your firm uses. Remember, I saw the irregularities years ago. You knew, Trenton whispered. Why didn't you turn me in? Because you were Sophie's husband, Arthur said, and I didn't want my daughter to be the wife of a felon. So I covered for you. I moved my own personal funds into your escrow accounts to balance the books every month. I was paying your debts to keep you out of prison, hoping you'd stop, hoping you'd grow up. The revelation hit Trenton like a physical blow. The millions of dollars he thought he had made or hidden, it was Arthur's money all along. Arthur had been secretly subsidizing Trenton's theft to protect Sophie from the shame. But you divorced her, Arthur said, his eyes hardening. And yesterday you tried to destroy her. You broke the compact, Trenton. So this morning I withdrew my cover funds. The hole in your accounts is now visible to everyone, especially the FBI. Agent Reynolds stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Trenton Graves, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and filing a false federal report. No, Trenton gasped, backing away. It's a misunderstanding. I can explain. Donovan, tell them. He turned to look for the private investigator. But down the street the black sedan was gone. Donovan Stark had seen the wind change and vanished. Turn around, Mr. Graves, Reynolds commanded. Trenton felt the cold steel click around his wrists. He was shoved against the side of the FBI SUV. His face was pressed against the cool metal. He looked sideways and saw Arthur standing there. The old man wasn't gloating. He wasn't laughing. He just looked tired. He turned around and walked back into his garage, picking up a wrench as the bay door slowly rolled down, shutting Trenton out of his world forever. The holding cell at the Federal Detention Center was a stark contrast to the penthouse at Skyline Heights. The walls were cinder block painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. The toilet was stainless steel and sat in the corner exposed. Trenton had been there for 6 hours. His suit jacket had been taken. His tie and shoelaces had been removed to prevent self-harm. He sat on the metal bench barefoot, shivering in the aggressive air conditioning. He had demanded a lawyer. He called Preston. Preston hung up. He called his old firm. They told him he was being sued by 20 different clients and hung up. He called his mother. She cried and said the police had already been to her house asking about stolen assets. He was radioactive. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. Trenton looked up, expecting an interrogator. It was Sophie. She walked in looking like an angel in the fluorescent hell of the prison. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans. She didn't look rich. She didn't look vengeful. She just looked like Sophie. The guard stayed outside. 5 minutes, he grunted. Trenton scrambled off the bench. Sophie. Oh God, Sophie, you have to help me. You have to talk to your dad. This is insane. I'm going to prison for 20 years. Sophie stood by the door, keeping her distance. I know, Trenton. The DA is talking about making an example of you. The lawyer who stole from widows and orphans. That's the headline. I didn't steal, Trenton pleaded, though he knew it was a lie. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. I just needed to maintain appearances for us. For the firm. For you, Sophie corrected him gently. It was always for you. Sophie, please. Trenton fell to his knees. It was a pathetic sight, the once great titan of industry begging on a concrete floor. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the divorce. About Chloe. I was stupid. I was drunk on success. I still love you. Tell Arthur to drop the charges. He owns the bank. He can say it was a clerical error." Sophie looked down at him. Her eyes were dry. "He can't, Trenton, even if he wanted to. You called the FBI. You started the train that ran you over." "He can fix it," Trenton cried. "He's powerful. He's a diplomat. He's a billionaire." Sophie sighed and sat on the edge of the metal table looking at him. "Do you know why my father is powerful, Trenton?" she asked. "Because he has money," Trenton spat. "Because he has leverage." "No." Sophie shook her head. "Money is just paper. Leverage is just fear. Dad has something you never understood. He has loyalty." She gestured around the room. "The judge who signed your warrant," Sophie said. "Dad fixed his first car when he was a college student and couldn't afford a mechanic. Dad did it for free. The judge never forgot." Trenton stared at her. "The agent in charge, Reynolds," Sophie continued. "His daughter had leukemia 10 years ago. The insurance company denied the treatment. Dad paid for it anonymously. Reynolds only found out last year." Sophie leaned forward. "And the manager at Le Sommet, where you were humiliated, Dad helped him get his green card sponsorship when no one else would hire him." Trenton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "You see, Trenton," Sophie said softly, "you spent your life building a tower so you could look down on people. My father spent his life building a foundation so he could lift people up. You thought you were fighting a mechanic, but you were fighting an entire city of people who love him." Trenton slumped back against the wall. He realized the terrifying truth. He hadn't just angered a rich man. He had attacked a community pillar. He was a virus that the city's immune system had finally decided to purge. "Why?" Trenton whispered. "Why did he let me marry you if he knew I was a fraud?" "Because I loved you," Sophie said, her voice finally cracking with emotion. "And he hoped that my love would be enough to change you. He gave you a loan. He gave you cover. He gave you 10 years of grace. He wanted to be wrong about you, Trenton. He wanted you to be the man I thought you were." She stood up and walked to the door. She knocked on the steel. "Sophie, wait." Trenton reached out. "What happens to me now?" Sophie looked back over her shoulder. The expression on her face was one of finality. It was the look of a woman closing a book she had already read. "Now," Sophie said, "now you experience the one thing you never gave anyone else. Consequences." The door opened. She walked out. "Sophie!" Trenton screamed. "Sophie, don't leave me here! I have nothing!" The heavy door slammed shut with a final booming clang that echoed in the small cell. Trenton was alone. The silence of the prison pressed in on him. He looked at his hands, no Rolex, no wedding ring, just pale, shaking skin. He curled up on the metal bench and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. He thought about the garage. He thought about the grease under Arthur's fingernails. He realized now that the grease wasn't filth. It was the residue of work, of building things, of fixing things. Trenton had never built anything. He had only moved paper and consumed value, and now the paper was gone, and he was the one being crumpled up and tossed aside. But the story had one final twist, a twist that would happen not in a jail cell, but in a courtroom where Trenton Graves would try one last desperate gambit to save his skin, and Arthur Miller would deliver the final lesson. The United States District Court was packed to the rafters. It wasn't just the press hungry for the spectacle of a fallen socialite. The back rows were filled with the victims. Former junior partners Trenton had fired to save pennies, contractors he had stiffed, and clients whose trust funds he had drained. They sat in grim silence, waiting for justice. Trenton Graves sat alone at the defense table. His orange jumpsuit clashed violently with his pale, sweat-sheened skin. Beside him, Ms. Alvarez, an overworked public defender, shuffled papers nervously. Trenton ignored her pleas to plead guilty. He was vibrant with a manic energy, convinced that his silver tongue, the same one that had won him millions, could save him one last time. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Harold Vance swept into the room. Trenton squinted. He had played golf with Vance years ago. He flashed a subtle, confident smile, hoping for a nod of recognition. But Judge Vance looked at him with the cold, dead eyes of the law. There were no friends here today. The prosecution was swift and brutal. They presented a mountain of evidence: wire transfers, false tax returns, and the damning testimony regarding the false FBI tip. It painted Trenton not as a mastermind, but as a desperate, greedy thief. "Mr. Graves," Judge Vance said, looking over his spectacles, "does the defense wish to make a statement?" Trenton shot up before Ms. Alvarez could stop him. "I do, Your Honor, and I call Arthur Miller to the stand." A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. This was highly irregular for a sentencing hearing, but Arthur, sitting in the front row next to Sophie, stood up slowly. "No objection, Your Honor." Arthur took the stand. He wore a simple, ill-fitting suit, yet he commanded more respect in that chair than Trenton ever had in his Italian silks. Trenton approached the stand feeling a surge of his old arrogance. "Mr. Miller, you claim to be a simple mechanic, yet you own a bank. You claim to be moral, yet you watched me borrow funds for years and did nothing. Isn't it true that you entrapped me? That you used your connections to frame me because I divorced your daughter?" Arthur leaned into the microphone, his expression unreadable. "No, Trenton, that is not true." "Then why did you wait?" Trenton pressed, sensing a kill. "If I was a criminal, why didn't you stop me 5 years ago?" "Because of the trust," Arthur said softly. Trenton paused, his brow furrowing. "What trust?" Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and produced a thick document. 5 years ago, when I first noticed the irregularities in your accounts, I didn't want to destroy you. You were family, so I created a revocable living trust in your name. I deposited $50 million into it." The courtroom gasped. The silence that followed was deafening. 50 million. Trenton choked out, his knees shaking. "It was set to vest on your 10th wedding anniversary." Arthur continued, his voice steady but laced with sadness. "On the condition that you had paid back the money you took from your clients. I wanted to give you a safety net. A chance to come clean, pay your debts, and start fresh. I wanted you to be the man Sophie believed you were." Arthur held up the deed. "But there was one clause, Trenton. If the beneficiary commits an act of malice against the grantor's family, the trust is void." Arthur's eyes hardened. "You didn't just divorce Sophie. You tried to humiliate her. You bragged about leaving her with nothing. You chose malice, and in doing so you didn't just lose your wife. You lost the $50 million that was sitting there waiting for you." Trenton stared at the paper in horror. It was a fortune, more than he had ever stolen, more than he had ever dreamed of. It had been his for the taking if he had just been decent. "You lost a legacy because you couldn't check your ego," Arthur finished, stepping down from the stand. Trenton stood rooted to the spot, his narrative of victimhood shattered. He wasn't the prey of a vindictive billionaire. He was a fool who had burned a winning lottery ticket just to watch the sparks. "Mr. Graves, return to your seat," Judge Vance ordered. Trenton slumped into his chair. He didn't hear Ms. Alvarez's final weak defense. He only heard the judge's voice booming like thunder. "Trenton Graves, for the crimes of wire fraud, embezzlement, and perjury, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal correctional institution. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $12 million. The gavel banged a final, irrevocable gunshot. 2 marshals grabbed Trenton by the arms. As they dragged him toward the side door, he looked back one last time. Sophie was hugging her father. She looked relieved, light-free. She didn't look back at him. The door slammed shut, and Trenton Graves was left in the dark. 3 years later, Le Sommet was unrecognizable. Sophie had transformed the snobbish club into a warm, bustling restaurant. In the corner booth, Arthur sat in his grease-stained mechanic's jumpsuit enjoying a burger. He remained the city's humble, hidden guardian. Sophie slid into the seat across from him. "I got a letter from him," she said quietly. "He's working in the prison auto shop. He says his hands are always dirty and he finally understands what you meant about grounding." Arthur smiled, a genuine weathered expression. Maybe there's hope for him yet, but he's got 12 years left to figure it out. 300 miles away, inmate 49201 wiped sweat from his brow. Trenton Graves looked at his hands stained black with oil. "Graves, fix that alternator," a guard shouted. "Yes, sir," Trenton called back, tightening a bolt on the prison bus. It wasn't the life of luxury he once craved, but as the engine roared to life, he felt a strange satisfaction. He had lost everything to find the one thing he lacked himself. And that is the story of Trenton Graves, the man who tried to outsmart a mechanic and lost a legacy. It's a powerful lesson. Never mistake silence for weakness. What do you think? Did Arthur go too far? Or did Trenton get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.